On December 19, 1997, James Cameron released the film Titanic into theaters. The film was unparalleled in popularity and was the highest-grossing film for 12 years until James Cameron made his 2010 Pocahontas remake. This was the greatest leap in Titanic's popularity since the discovery of the wreck back in the 80s by Dr. Robert Ballard. The glories of transportation in the first half of the 20th century are unmatched in the hellscape of modern architecture we admire today. Seeing the Titanic movie provided a brief snapshot into the incredible luxury of the age of progress, not to mention the story of star-crossed lovers that tied it all together. Now, the ship itself is by far the most well-known vessel to ever grace the seas, and this wasn't the result of the movie. The movie was a result of this. Today, every ship represented in the media is named after it. They even sell Titanic merchandise. Hey consumers, show off your favorite tragedies with this Titanic backpack, Titanic candle, and Titanic Hawaiian shirt. Now the question arises, over this past year, why have I called the Titanic the RMS clickbait? To answer that question, I'll have to go into a little bit of background. The use of Titanic as a representation of every ship in media, I feel, is a sign of a more serious underlying issue. And it really boils down to the commercialization of the tragedy. In Titanic's day, the respect people held towards the sinking was comparable to how people feel about events like 9/11. Up until the 1920s, the Titanic disaster was viewed as an instance of modern technology failing and the consequences literally rippling. Titanic was literally the pinnacle of shipbuilding at that point. And even though the RMS Olympic was a bigger deal for her maiden voyage, Titanic still was the largest ship in the world when it sank. To some extent, it was the first major international disaster in the new era of communication, and really the first international media craze. Although the city of Southampton was arguably the most affected from a casualties standpoint, passengers aboard the vessel were from more than just Europe or America. This is noted in the fact that there are Titanic memorials all over the world. The way the media reported on the disaster was also a significant contributor to the grief people felt about it. A few hours after her sinking, many newspapers reported the ship was being towed in and hadn't really sunk. This was a result of a cargo ship nearly sinking and being towed in around the same time, and messages probably getting crossed. This also was the result of the belief that human ingenuity had truly made an unsinkable vessel. There was just too much faith in her unsinkableness, even though they never really officially reported her to be unsinkable. Once the news finally washed over the public, and the truth finally did come out that she had actually sunk, it was unbelievable. Everyone wanted to know exactly what happened, and over the years, survivors were interviewed for their experience. These people told stories of the reality of the situation, their traumas, their hopes, and the consequences of the tragedy. About this time, people began jumping from the stern. My friend Milton Long and myself stood beside each other and jumped on the rail. We did not give each other any messages for back home, 'cause neither thought we would ever get back. The partly filled lifeboat standing by about 100 yards away never came back. Why on earth they never came back is a mystery. How could any human being fail to heed those cries? Within the area described, which was as far as my eyes could reach, there arose to the sky the most horrible sounds ever heard by mortal man, except by those of us who survived this terrible tragedy. The agonizing cries of death from over 1,000 throats, the wails and groans of the suffering, the shrieks of the terror-stricken, and the awful gaspings for breath of those in the last throes of drowning. Do these sound like the stories you'd want to commercialize, joke about, make up clickbait to try and get a few $100? These were real people, and back then, people actually understood how tragic the event really was. Now, this more depressing part of the video brings me to my current point: historical disconnect. We as human beings feel sympathy for those who suffer. As long as there is someone to cry out for something, in theory, the memory of it and their cries will not be lost. The last Titanic survivor died in 2009, and even then the disconnect to the event had set in. No one would forget that it occurred, and James Cameron's film in 1997 was really the last time there was a surge of reverence towards the tragedy. It was just too long ago for people to still have connections to it. If you ask most adults today, they can tell you where they were when 9/11 happened. Many can tell you where they were when the Berlin Wall fell. Some remember the Challenger disaster. But today, no one was there. There are only about 100 living people born before Titanic's fateful voyage today, and all were children when it happened. No one is left to describe the firsthand of the tragedy. And that means one thing: opportunity. First, it may start with jokes or a funny t-shirt. And next, you get this. When I was a kid, I loved the Titanic. It's the reason I have this channel today, and I get that other kids do too. And it's not their fault for buying into this, but it just messes with me. No nautical tragedy comes close to Titanic's level of commercialization. I would argue no major historical tragedy comes close to Titanic's commercialization. You don't see Lusitania t-shirts. Closest thing I can think of is maybe Pearl Harbor. They took a horrible event with some descriptions so brutal I can't even put them in this video and made a meme out of it. The last Titanic survivor, Melvina Dean, once said, "The Titanic was a tragedy which tore so many families apart. I lost my father, and he lies on that wreck. I think it is disrespectful to make entertainment of such a tragedy." Stuff like this was happening all over even before her last survivors passed away. But rest assured, when I refer to Titanic as the RMS clickbait, I don't intend to mock the ship and certainly not her passengers. The people I'm mocking are my fellow YouTubers. Not these guys. These guys use effort and do genuine research. I mean the view farmers, the exaggerated countdown channels, the clickbaiters. These are the guys that helped make Titanic's legacy into something that it's not. And that was all fostered by the merchandising of the tragedy. Now I gotta clarify, I don't think all Titanic media is bad. Definitely not. I think James Cameron's film is a truly artful representation of the tragedy, with only one or two exaggerations. Also, when I say commercialization, I don't mean selling models or nonfiction books. I mean the garbage designed to sell. Now it seems interest in the Titanic has never been higher. Dr. Eric Kentley describes it well. We imagine erroneously that Titanic represents a golden age that was symbolically lost when the ship went down. The ship is just too legendary to not be thought about. And you know what? That's okay. It was a remarkable ship with an insane story. The tale of Titanic has breached the generational gap, but our emotional connection to it failed to do so. Now this video is just the words of a man with a microphone, and whether 5 people or 500,000 people see it, I'll be satisfied. Someone has to mention the second tragedy that resulted from the first one, the commercialization of the Titanic.